Was Jesus ever married?
Yes. And we know that because we have an account of his marriage, which was the marriage at Cana. So the marriage at Cana was the marriage of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. That's why, at that marriage, it was the bridegroom who provided the water to wine. And of course, the guy who provided the water to wine was actually Jesus himself. He was the master of that particular marriage. That was the marriage, that was the wedding of Mary Magdalene and Jesus. We have more evidence because I say that Jesus was Jesus of Gamala. And we won't go into this, we've talked about this a lot before. There are many, many reasons for thinking that Jesus was Jesus of Gamala, an AD 60s character again. We're talking about the AD 60s. But Robert Eisenman and myself have both said that Mary Bothus was Mary Magdalene. Although Robert Eisenman, having proved this in 250 pages of text, at the end of it, he says, well, this is not possible because they live in the wrong era. Again, we come across this 40-year chronological chasm. So the Mary character has to be in the AD 30s, AD 20s, 30s, and Mary Bothus lived in the AD 60s. And so at the final analysis, he says, well, they must have just based the history of Mary Magdalene upon this character, Mary Bothus, because they don't live in the same era. But of course, if the gospel story is an AD 60s story, then of course they can be the same person. And so we get this character called Mary Bothus, who seems to be exactly the same as the Bethany sisters, as Mary Magdalene. They both lived at the house of Simon, for instance, and various other things. The trouble is with this connection is that Mary Bothus, Mary Magdalene, married Jesus. And we have that from the Talmud, that she married Jesus of Gamala, the person who long ago, before I even came across Mary Bothus, 20 years before or more, I said that Jesus was Jesus of Gamala. And now I find that this Jesus of Gamala chap married Mary Magdalene, which was a nice, interesting confirmation that what I'd said previously is correct. The problem with that for Christians, you see, Christians could turn around and say, look, we've got all this information. We've proved that our Jesus was a real character in the historical record. We have the information. We have all the documentation. But of course, they can't say that because the story it gives is rather different to the story they've been told and the story they've been teaching. A, it's an AD 60s event, which conflicts with what they've been taught. B, Mary Bothus, Mary Magdalene, was the richest woman in Judea. In fact, she was the richest woman in the whole of the Near East. Now, that's a problem, because suddenly we're no longer talking about pauper carpenters. She was a princess. She was, as I say, the wealthiest person in the Near East. We're straying away from what people think the gospel story is all about. And the other problem, I was trying to find a reference here, but I can't find it, is that, oh yes, it's 1 Corinthians 9:5. The other problem is that Mary Magdalene was the sister of Jesus. So Jesus married his sister. And that's a problem for the church. I mean, it's not unusual, because if you think about it, all of the pharaohs of Egypt married their sisters or their daughters or whatever. I say that King David married his daughter. Even in the 1st century, Agrippa II was married to his sister. So this was not unusual. This was fairly common, especially within the royal families of this era. To keep the bloodline pure, they tended to marry within their family. And of course, the disciples did the same. And so this is Saul talking, I'm pretty sure. I'll look it up in a minute. In 1 Corinthians 9:5, he says, "Have we not the power to lead about a sister wife, the same as the other apostles and the brethren of the Lord and Cephas?" Cephas being Peter, of course. This is Saul wanting to have a sister wife. Now, you won't always get this written like this in the English translation. But I had it translated from the Greek and it came out with sister wife. What it says in the King James Version is, "Have we not the power to lead a sister as a wife, or a sister and a wife?" And what else do they say? In some of the other Bibles, they say a sister like a wife or something. But there are 2 Bibles I tend to use quite a lot when we come across a verse that is tricky, that's controversial. I use the Darby or the Rotherham Bibles, because both of those are literal Bibles. So they haven't tried to interpret the text. And they both say sister wife, because that's what it says in the Greek. And of course, that's been mistranslated in a lot of the other Bibles, because they don't want you to know that the disciples were asking. Well, some of the disciples were having sister wives, and another of the disciples was asking, or the apostles was asking, if he can have a sister wife as well, because it's controversial. And that's the reasons why everyone has to deny that Jesus had a wife. A, it was the AD 60s. B, she was stupendously rich. And C, she was his sister, probably actually his half-sister. But remember, even within the Bible, Abraham married his half-sister. It's exactly the same. They were following the same old traditions. So nobody should be shocked by this, only shocked by more recent customs and traditions. And they're not looking at the customs and traditions that would have been extant at that time, because loads of people married their sisters in that era. But of course, when the King James was translated, 1600s, that was not so acceptable. And so it had to be deleted. And so now people get all shocked by it. But yeah, of course, Jesus was married. And his wife was Mary Magdalene. That's why it says in the Nag Hammadi's Gospels that Mary Magdalene used to kiss Jesus. And we think it says on the mouth, but we're not sure because the word is missing. And Peter is saying, saying to Mary Magdalene, there's this big contention between Mary Magdalene and Peter within the Gnostic Gospels. They're at each other's throats all the time, because they're both equally powerful people, of course. And Peter says to Mary, "Why does Jesus love you more than he loves us?" And Mary says, "Why does Jesus love me more?" As if he's an idiot, Well, of course, he loved Mary more than the disciples because he was married to the woman, you know. She was the wife. And of course, as a rabbi, because Jesus was supposed to be a rabbi, he was supposed to be a high priest. The rabbis, of course, were supposed to be married. It'd be very, very unusual if he was not married. And the high priest had to have two wives. And that's another heresy that they won't talk about, because Jesus was married to both of the Bethany sisters. He was married to Mary and Martha. So he had two wives. And that's another heresy they can't get over. So yeah, it's a matter of a change in culture and a slight change in the translation. But there we go.